You didn't find this message by accident, and I'm not saying that to sound dramatic or mystical. I'm saying it because something very specific has been happening in your spirit, and this moment is confirming it. If you're listening to this right now, it's because God has been dealing with you quietly about connection, about covenant, about the person tied to your future in a way you can't explain to anyone else. This isn't about loneliness. This is deeper than that. You've felt a pull, a knowing that there is someone chosen by heaven for you, not created by desire, not forced by timing, but appointed by God Himself. And the strange part is, even when you tried to ignore it, even when you tried to convince yourself to settle or move on, that knowing never left. You've prayed differently than most people pray about relationships. You didn't just ask God for love. You asked Him for alignment. You asked Him for protection. You asked Him not to let you connect with anyone who would derail your purpose. And those prayers cost you something, because God answers those kinds of prayers by removing people, not adding them. That's why your story doesn't look normal. You watched others fall into relationships easily while yours felt delayed, interrupted, or blocked. You felt moments where someone almost fit, but something always stopped it. Either they changed, disappeared, or revealed something that made it impossible to move forward. And every time it hurt, but it also felt intentional, like God was saying, "Not this one," without explaining why. What you've been experiencing is not rejection, it's recognition. When heaven marks a union, God becomes extremely protective over it. He does not allow premature access. He does not allow counterfeit connections to settle into covenant space. And if you are someone called into a God-ordained partnership, the enemy will try to rush you into substitutes. That's why God slowed you down. You may have felt isolated, not just emotionally, but relationally. Like you didn't fully fit with people who were dating casually, playing games, or moving without discernment. Conversations about love felt shallow to you. You wanted depth. You wanted meaning. You wanted something built on faith, obedience, and purpose, not just attraction. That wasn't you being difficult. That was God shaping your discernment. There's a reason you couldn't attach easily. A reason your heart guarded itself even when your emotions wanted more. A reason God didn't let you fully give yourself away. You weren't being withheld from love. You were being preserved for covenant. And here's the part that matters most: approval happens in heaven before connection happens on earth. God does not join two people randomly. Scripture shows us that God prepares both sides separately before He brings them together. Isaac didn't search for Rebekah, God arranged it. Adam didn't ask for Eve, God presented her. Ruth didn't chase Boaz, God aligned their paths. Divine partnerships are recognized in heaven long before they are revealed in time. That's why the waiting felt heavy. That's why you felt resistance when you tried to force something. That's why peace only came when you surrendered control. You're not behind, you're not forgotten, and you're not imagining this. The reason your heart has been guarded so fiercely is because God Himself has been guarding the connection. What heaven approves, hell tries to interfere with, but it cannot cancel. If this message is stirring something deep inside you, it's because your spirit already knows. You've felt the preparation. You've felt the pruning. You've felt God teaching you patience, healing, self-control, and trust, not so you could be alone, but so you could be ready. This is not about fantasy. This is about timing. God is not delaying you to punish you. He is aligning you so that when the connection begins, it will not break under pressure. And the fact that you are hearing this now tells me something important. Heaven has already acknowledged this union. The process you're in is not uncertainty, it's confirmation. You didn't stumble onto this message. You were led here. Because when God approves a divine partner, He also prepares the heart to recognize it. If you pay close attention to your journey, the proof has been there all along. Not in the form of a relationship appearing suddenly, but in the way God has been protecting you from the wrong ones. Every delay, every interruption, every almost that never became permanent was evidence that heaven was already involved. When God approves a divine partner, He becomes very intentional about what is allowed to touch your heart. You may have noticed that whenever you tried to move ahead on your own timing, something always went wrong. Conversations shifted unexpectedly. Feelings changed without explanation. Red flags surfaced right when things started getting serious. Sometimes the other person walked away. Other times you lost peace even though everything looked good on the surface. That wasn't bad luck. That was God stepping in. There were seasons when you questioned yourself. You wondered why relationships seemed so easy for others but so complicated for you. You watched people settle, compromise, or ignore warning signs just to avoid being alone. You tried to convince yourself that maybe you were asking for too much. Maybe your standards were too high. Maybe your faith was making things harder than they needed to be. But deep down, you knew the truth. You couldn't move without peace. You couldn't attach without clarity. Your spirit wouldn't allow it. That is one of the clearest signs of divine approval, when God does not give you permission to connect casually, when your heart is not free to attach without confirmation, when emotional shortcuts feel uncomfortable instead of exciting. God was teaching you to recognize alignment, not just attraction. You've also experienced a kind of loneliness that felt different. Not the loneliness that comes from lack of people, but the loneliness of being set apart. You may have had attention, options, even opportunities, but none of them felt right. It felt like something was missing, even when you tried to make something work. That emptiness wasn't because you were ungrateful. It was because nothing counterfeit could satisfy what God has already approved. At times, the waiting felt painful. You prayed, you fasted, you surrendered, and still, nothing seemed to happen. You wondered why God would place the desire for covenant in your heart, but not fulfill it yet. What you didn't see was that God was working on both sides. While He was shaping you, He was also shaping the one connected to you. And alignment requires timing, not just willingness. Heaven never releases a divine connection prematurely. If one side is not ready, God will delay the meeting, not to frustrate you, but to protect the future. A relationship formed too early can collapse under pressure. So God allows the waiting to build strength, maturity, and spiritual grounding in both individuals. You've faced spiritual resistance around this area specifically. Doubt crept in. Fear whispered that maybe it would never happen. The enemy tried to convince you to settle or give up. That resistance is not random. The enemy only fights what matters. He only attacks what carries purpose. If your future connection had no weight, there would be no opposition. And yet, despite the pressure, you're still here, still believing, still hoping, still trusting God with your heart. That alone tells you something important. God has sustained you in the waiting. He didn't let bitterness take root. He didn't let compromise define you. Even when you felt tired, you didn't lose your faith. Another sign of approval is how God has been refining you personally. You've grown emotionally. You've healed from past wounds. You've learned boundaries. You've learned to hear God's voice more clearly. You're no longer desperate. You're discerning. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because God is preparing you to recognize and steward a divine partnership. There were moments when you thought you were ready years ago, but looking back now, you can see how much you've changed. Your perspective is deeper. Your priorities are clearer. Your faith is stronger. If the connection had happened back then, it may not have survived what God is calling it into now. Heaven approved this union before it ever showed up in your life. That approval triggered the process, not the manifestation. Everything you've been walking through, the delays, the pruning, the protection has been evidence of that decision. What God approves, He prepares. What He prepares, He protects. And what He protects, He reveals at the right time. This is why nothing could be forced. This is why nothing counterfeit could stay. And this is why, even now, you feel a quiet certainty beneath the waiting. The connection is not missing, it's aligning. And what heaven has already approved will not fail to appear in God's perfect time. What happens next is not something you chase. It's something you align with. This is the part where many people get restless. But this is also where wisdom matters most. When heaven approves a divine partner, God doesn't rush the unveiling, he invites obedience. And obedience in this season looks quieter than you might expect. You may feel a shift happening now. Not excitement, not anxiety, but a calm awareness. A sense that something is moving even though nothing is visible yet. That's because this phase is about positioning, not pursuit. God is not asking you to search for your partner. He is asking you to stay yielded, sensitive, and anchored in Him. Your responsibility right now is not to figure out who the person is. It's to guard your heart. Scripture tells us to guard it above all else, because everything flows from it. That instruction matters most when something valuable is approaching. This is not the time to entertain confusion, emotional distraction, or voices that pressure you to compromise. Peace is your confirmation. If something disrupts it, it's not aligned. Pay attention to how God is sharpening your discernment. You're becoming more aware of what drains you versus what strengthens you. You're noticing which conversations feel heavy and which feel life-giving. That's not random. God is teaching you to recognize the atmosphere of your future connection before it arrives. When the right person enters your life, they won't pull you away from God, they'll bring you closer. This is also a season of instruction. God may be dealing with you about habits, priorities, or areas of obedience that seemed unrelated to relationships before. Don't ignore that. Divine partnerships are built on shared submission to God, not just shared feelings. What God corrects now is what He protects later. You don't need to announce this season. You don't need to explain it to people who don't understand it. Some things are meant to be carried privately until God reveals them publicly. Silence here is not secrecy, it's stewardship. Even Mary pondered things in her heart before the promise fully manifested. Be careful not to rush ahead emotionally. Just because heaven has approved the connection doesn't mean every opportunity is from God. Counterfeits often appear right before divine fulfillment, offering familiarity without alignment. They may look good, sound spiritual, and even feel comfortable, but they won't carry peace. Trust the check in your spirit. God speaks there first. This is also a time to release timelines. God operates outside of urgency. What feels slow to you is precise to Him. When the moment comes, it will feel natural, not forced. It won't require striving, manipulation, or anxiety. It will unfold with clarity and confirmation. Continue to pray, but let your prayers shift. Instead of asking when, ask, prepare me. Instead of asking who, ask, align me. God honors prayers rooted in trust. He already knows your desire. What He's developing now is your readiness to steward what you ask for. And when the connection begins, it will feel familiar in a way that brings peace, not chaos. Not because you've met before, but because your spirits will recognize alignment. It won't be perfect, but it will be purposeful. It won't distract you from your calling, it will support it. Until then, remain grounded. Stay faithful in what God has already given you. Don't put your life on pause waiting for someone to arrive. Walk fully in obedience, joy, and growth now. Divine partners don't complete you, they walk alongside you in purpose. What heaven approves, heaven sustains. You don't have to fear missing it, you don't have to force it. God is faithful, and He keeps His promises. If He placed this desire in your heart, He also planned its fulfillment. Stay ready, stay submitted, stay at peace. What God has ordained will arrive at the right moment, and when it does, you'll understand why nothing before it worked.